All right, government students, today we're going to talk about congressional elections and how members of Congress and what they do to get themselves reelected. So this is the current breakdown of Congress. You have about 221 Democrats, 211 Republicans, with a few vacant seats for various different reasons. Meanwhile, you have 48 Democrats and 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats in the Senate, and 50 Republicans, giving a tie, making the vice president the current tiebreaker on that. So this is the current breakdown. Okay? But what you need to know about congressional elections is they happen every 2 years. Okay? Every 2 years, you're going to have a brand new Congress because every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives is up for reelection. So we are currently in the 117th Congress that will end in January of 2023. And every seat, as I mentioned before, in the House is going to be up for reelection in 2022. Okay? So that's 435 seats up for reelection. Okay? In addition to that, 1/3 of the seats in the Senate are going to be up for reelection. The framers designed this to better provide some continuity between the different Congresses and make things kind of slow down in the Senate a little bit and not have some of the knee-jerk reactions that you're going to get on public policy decisions made by the public just during one election year. It's going to take time for those things to change over, where in the House, it's going to be reflective more of the will of the people. So what that means is currently about 33 to 34 seats in the Senate are going to be up for re-election every 2 years. Currently, Michigan's 2 senators are going to be in the middle of their terms when it comes to 2022. That means neither of them are going to be up for re-election. But during these elections, if you're an incumbent, if you're somebody who already holds that position, they tend to have an advantage because they're a well-known name and they have the resources available to kind of continue with that, with their elections. They kind of know the process already, where if you have somebody coming in as a challenger, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So when 2022 rolls around, Bill Huizenga, the current member representing Coopersville in the House of Representatives, is going to be is going to be the incumbent in that instance, and my guess is probably will be reelected. So throughout most of our history, when it comes to congressional elections, you have elections that are happening every 2 years. That means you have elections happening on presidential years, and you have elections happening in what we call midterm elections. All right, that's when it's an off year for president, meaning the president is not up for re-election. And what has traditionally happened is that voter turnout is significantly lower on the midterm elections than they are during a presidential year. Okay? And a lot of that's because people aren't quite as interested, right? They aren't quite as invested in who their members of Congress are as they are with who their president is. Okay? One of the other things that usually happens during a midterm election is that the party that controls the presidency, so in this case it would be Democrats, a lot of times loses seats in either the House or the Senate, or potentially both, during a midterm election. We saw that with President Trump. We saw that with Barack Obama on his 2 midterm elections. They tend to lose seats. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to happen that way. It's just something that does tend to happen. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to, Democrats will lose control of either the House or the Senate, but they could lose some seats. But again, especially in the House with the current makeup, the Democrats can't afford to lose too many seats before losing control of the House and giving that back over to Republicans. Okay? When it comes to elections get really, really complicated because every single state has its own rules, right? How those elections are conducted, whether that's Electron, a Scantown, Punch-Out. We don't really use Punch-Outs anymore, but that was huge controversy back in the 2000 election with Punch-Outs. That created a lot of issues, brought it all the way to the Supreme Court. Okay? The voting requirements in states are going to be different. So some states are going to require state youthfuls to show some sort of photo ID to prove who you are. Other states are not going to require that. They might just require a proof of address or something like that. Okay? And then the rules for registering to vote. For some states, as soon as you turn out 18, you're automatically registered to vote. Other times, you need to do days or even weeks ahead of time. In some states, you have to be registered to vote up to 4 weeks before the actual election day. Where here in Michigan, after proposal 1, if I recall, I think it was Proposal 1 in 2018, that allowed same-day voter registration for registering to vote. And a lot of this has to do with trying to keep voter rolls current, right? People move, people die. With that, you want to make sure that the people who are able to vote in your precinct are the people who are actually living there and the people who should be able to vote in there, because again, where you live is going to change what kind of ballot you have, who's running for what different positions and such. So that becomes one of the challenges: is how do we do that, but at the same time make sure everybody who's a U.S. citizen allowed to vote can still have that opportunity. So that becomes a challenge. So when it comes to politicians, members of Congress, what do they try to do in order to win election? Well, there's 3 major things that they can do to try and get reelected. Number 1, keep the majority of their constituents happy. If a majority of the constituents like what they're doing, it is probably good news for that particular member of Congress, because they're probably going to be elected, right? Again, a constituent is a person that a congressperson represents. That's the people that a congressperson represents. So we talked about Bill Huizenga. He's the representative for the 2nd Congressional District here in Michigan. His constituents would be the people of Coopersville, the people of all of Ottawa County, actually, and most of Muskegon County, and such. Everybody who lives in the 2nd Congressional District, that would be Bill Huizenga's constituents. Okay? And if he can keep the majority of those people happy, they can probably get reelected. Now, those people still have to show up to vote, okay? And they still have to go and do that. But having the majority of them happy, it goes a long way. Okay? Number 2, and we see this one every single time election year rolls out, is you start to see all the advertisements, okay, that are coming out. Okay? And what they're trying to do is they're trying to mobilize people to vote. They're trying to get people out and go to the polls, all right? And they're trying to mobilize what we call their political base. Okay? A political base is a group of voters who almost always support a single party's candidates when they're elected for office. So these are the people who vote what we call straight ticket a lot of times, which means if they vote all Republican or they vote all Democrat. By getting as many of those out as possible, that party ensures an ability to do a lot better on that particular election one. But the real key, the real secret of winning election is spending the most amount of money, right? Whoever spends the most money on a campaign tends to win. All right, and we're not talking like, oh, there's like a weak correlation. We're talking 80% of the time, 90% of the time in a lot of instances, whoever spends more money wins. Because money is what makes the world go around, and money is what makes politics work. So money is a huge, huge part of that. And we'll talk about some of the challenges that come of that later as we start talk about campaign financing in class a little bit. Another big issue when it comes to congressional elections is this thing called gerrymandering. Gerrymandering goes way, 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 way back, all the way back to 1812. Right? First couple of decades our country is actually in existence. And what gerrymandering refers to is those congressional district boundaries. Right? This can be at the state level and the different districts, like we talked about Luke Meerman's, our representative in the U.S. House, or Roger Victory in the U.S. Senate, or not the U.S. House, State House and State Senate. So those could be partially gerrymandered, right, where those particular lines are. But what gerrymandering is talking about is drawing those lines in such a way to give an advantage, an unfair advantage, to one party over its rivals. Okay? And this goes all the way back to 1812, in which the governor of Massachusetts, Elbridge Gerry, decided to try and draw up those congressional districts to make it so his party benefited. And they were able to get an extra seat or two in the state Senate. Critics looked at one of the districts and they said, man, that looks a lot like a salamander. And then another critic goes, no, it's not a salamander, it's a gerrymander. And the term is stuck. Gerrymandering happens on a regular basis. Republicans do it, Democrats do it. It's ugly. And when that happens, it's the voters who lose, because it makes uncompetitive districts. It makes districts in which the politician is feeling very safe and secure, doesn't have to worry about election, because a lot of times the people who show up to vote are the same people who show up to vote, and they already have a pretty good idea of how those people are going to vote. As a result, that particular congressperson can just go ahead and do what they want. They don't have to worry about it because they have the R next to their name or they have the D next to their name, and they feel pretty safe. And again, it makes an uncompetitive district. And really what's happening when you're gerrymandering is it's the politicians. All right, the politicians are the ones who are drawing the district lines in these cases. It's the politicians picking who is going to vote for them rather than the voters picking politicians. And there's two different methods that they use to gerrymander. Okay, there's packing and there's cracking. You have to be doing both of these to effectively gerrymander districts. So packing is drawing district lines such a way so that you're packing as many voters belonging to one particular political party into a district as you can possibly fit. Okay, this is done a lot of times around cities or even sometimes in rural areas as well, where you have a large number of voters for Democrats or a large number of voters for Republicans, and you're trying to fit as many of them as you can. So you're getting 70, 80, maybe 90% in some cases of voters who turn out on a regular basis are going to be of one particular political party. In conjunction with that, you're also going to do something called cracking, and this is where you draw up district lines. So it's kind of taking bits of voters away, and you're taking little bits into different districts to kind of slowly just erode away at that particular base. So you might pack them all into one particular district, and then around that you might crack away a few others to give an extra seat or two to one particular political party. Again, both Democrats and Republicans do this. Nobody is innocent. Nobody is innocent in this. And whenever, and this is a little bit my opinion, whenever gerrymandering happens, I feel like it's the voters who lose and the politicians and political parties that win. And the real change happens a few years ago in 2010 when this happened most recently, when computers started to get used. Right, the computers were analyzed just huge amounts of data and were able to compile voter tendencies based on prior history and everything like that, and census data, and they allowed the politicians to really do the gerrymander more effectively than it ever had done before. So, what's so bad with gerrymandering? Well, it allows those state legislatures, when they draw the lines, to pick districts that are going to be uncompetitive. Okay? It allows them to stack the board in their favor of their particular political party. Again, what is the goal of political parties? To win elections, and they're going to do whatever they have to do to win elections, and that includes gerrymandering here. Okay? It creates districts that are safe for their incumbents, right, for the Congress people that are in there, and it's uncompetitive. In the U.S. House right now, as many as 369 seats are considered to be entirely safe. That's 201 for Republicans, 169 for Democrats. And there's another 26 on top of that are almost safe. That means out of the 435 seats, about 40 are actually competitive districts. 40. That is less than 10% of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Okay, and what happens is when you have uncompetitive districts, the politicians who are running in those districts are going to play more towards the edges of their party than they will towards the people in the middle, and that becomes less responsive towards that means they're going to be less responsive towards the will of the people because they feel like they are safe no matter what they do. Right? And this explains why we can have such low favorability numbers when it comes to Congress as we start to look at people and as they're doing surveys and taking poll data as to saying, like, is Congress doing an effective job? And we can have just abysmal numbers when it comes to that, but yet they still keep getting reelected. Gerrymandering is a huge issue when it comes to that. So how do we fix gerrymandering? There are a number of different ways that you can do this, right? One thing you can do is you can require compactness and continuity standards for districts. There are some really, really obviously gerrymandered districts, and we'll look at some of them when we get to class. But having a compactness and continuity standard gets rid of the really obvious ones, the ones that you just look at and you kind of go, how did you get that? So that's one step that we can take. Additionally, you can require some bipartisan support. This forces both parties to actually have to work together on this, but the problem with this is some of those minority party candidates, all right, some of the parties from the minority are going to agree because they're looking at their chances of getting reelected, and it looks pretty favorable because everybody's getting packed into their particular district, right? So they may vote on in favor of a map that keeps them safe, even if that means it's detrimental to their party as a whole. Okay? So that's one of the challenges when it comes to requiring just requiring bipartisan support. Okay? Another option is to have an independent commission go about and draw the boundary lines. So this is what Michigan is doing. Michigan has an independent commission made up of 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 5 independents. That means they have no connection to either Republicans or Democrats to draw up the district lines. This takes away control completely away from the state legislatures and puts it in hands of ordinary people. The problem with this is it's going to be a much more lengthy and costly process to do it than it is to allow the state legislature to do it. So that is problematic. Another one is that you could require 2/3 support in both the state House and the state Senate to pass. This level of support is going to be much more difficult to attain with gerrymandering. It greatly reduces the likelihood of that, at least. However, if you have a state that has an overwhelming majority in one particular party, say a very rural state like Oklahoma, where maybe you have 2/3 of the state almost already voting in favor of one particular party, in this case Republicans, it's going to be really easy for that party to get an even bigger advantage and silence the voice of minorities. So there's no perfect fix in all this. A lot of it has to do with, all right, what's the best option that we can do to make it more difficult to gerrymander? So that's everything for the virtual notes here on congressional elections. I will talk a lot more on this when we get to class, so we'll see you there.